Edward, we don't need television. Not as long as we have our imagination. With imagination, I can be anything I want.
One of the thinkers I had some of the largest engagement with throughout the pursuit of my master's degree, and continue to have a personal interest in regarding his influence on contemporary philosophy, is that of 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche is commonly associated with the existentialist and postmodern spheres of contemporary philosophy, and his overall impact on shaping contemporary thought cannot be overstated enough. However, one of the aspects to Nietzsche's philosophy which I personally find the most fascinating is the high importance Nietzsche places on the role of art and aesthetics in justifying the existence of the human condition, especially in the absence of any presupposed system of objective values, the two-world theories which Nietzsche was so vociferously critical of. I thought it might make for a helpful and interesting video idea to go over some of the basics of Nietzsche's philosophy, and how and why art and aesthetics come to play such a strong role in Nietzschean thought. In one of Nietzsche's most significant early works, The Birth of Tragedy, Nietzsche considers the nature of the ancient Greek tragedy as an artistic medium and, more broadly, the role of artistic expression in the human condition. While fully dissecting any of Nietzsche's individual works goes far beyond the scope of a single YouTube video, in short, one of the most important aspects to Nietzsche's philosophy derived from Birth of Tragedy is the role of art as an expression of the underlying paradoxical duality which he believed to most define the human condition, as represented in the competing impulses of what Nietzsche describes as the Apollinian and Dionysian wills. The Apollinian will represents, to Nietzsche, the human impulse for rationality and order. It is through the Apollinian will that the human mind engages in the principle of individuation, that is, the act of neatly ordering existence into clearly definable categories, thus rendering existence intelligible and capable of being reasoned about. Importantly, Nietzsche is quick to liken this Apollinian world of rationality and order to that of an illusory world of dreams, a world of human construction, wherein one imposes the pretense of rationality, individuation, and categorization as a consequence of the innate human desire to create reason and intelligibility, even where there otherwise isn't any. The Dionysian will, by contrast, represents the paradoxical counterpoint to the rational nature of the human being as a more primal and animalistic underlying and competing impulse to embrace the irrationality and chaos of the human experience, along with the rejection of any pretense of individuation, in favor of a more primal sense of oneness with the world. Thus, the complex duality of the human condition, to Nietzsche, arises out of the paradoxical conflict between these two fundamental and competing aspects to the human will: the human urge to seek out rational comprehension and ordered categories of individuation, on the one hand, and the equally strong human desire to throw off the constraints of rationality and order for the sake of passionately embracing the unintelligible, chaotic, and primal oneness of existence. Thus, whereas Nietzsche likens the Apollinian will to the beautiful and divine dream images of Apollo, he likens the Dionysian will to that of a satyr, a beast-human hybrid from ancient Greek mythology, commonly associated with nature, and the more animalistic impulses of human beings, such as the human affinity for sexuality, drinking and revelry, and the enjoyment of music and art. Nietzsche goes on to argue in The Birth of Tragedy that this paradoxical duality to the human condition, the conflict between rationality and irrationality, between order and chaos, and between individuation and oneness, is precisely what most informs the ancient Greek tragedy and, more broadly, human artistic expression. More intellectual pursuits, such as those of science and philosophy, are purely the consequence of the Apollinian will, attempts by the human being to construct the illusory pretense of order, individuation, and the rational comprehension of existence. It is only in art, or at least the most effective and pure forms of artistic expression, such as the ancient Greek tragedy, that the human beings can engage with and fully express both aspects of the human condition and tap into the Dionysian will underlying the human experience. This is precisely why Nietzsche accuses figures like Euripides and Socrates of killing the art of the ancient Greek tragedy, as Euripides, a famous ancient Greek playwright and personal fan of Socrates, began incorporating aspects of Socratism and the Socratic impulse for rationality and intelligibility into ancient Greek theater, thus, as Nietzsche argues, removing the Dionysian element so crucial to proper artistic expression. While initial aspects of constructivism are relegated in Nietzsche's earlier work to the Apollinian will, as Nietzsche's work develops, he goes on to increasingly highlight the importance of creativity, artistry, and the human capacity to construct value and meaning for oneself. In one of his later works, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche places considerable emphasis on one of his most famous and well-known concepts, that being the idealized role of the Übermensch, commonly translated as Overman or Superman in English. Nietzsche discusses the Overman as an idealized end for the human condition, something the constant flux of human existence is moving towards, like the next stage of human development, just as human beings themselves are the next stage of development from the animals from which we developed. Keeping in line with Nietzsche's strong emphasis on aesthetic justification and creativity, what defines the Overman, the Übermensch, more than anything else is his capacity to create new values and construct meaning for himself as an extension of his own will, almost like an avant-garde artist rejecting the presupposition of pre-existent systems of values. Nietzsche is fiercely critical of what are commonly known as two-world theories. Two-world theories refer to the assumed existence of objective value systems which pre-exist and originate from outside of the human will, such as Plato's dualist metaphysics, which regards the form of goodness and beauty itself as something external to the human being, and, therefore, in Nietzsche's view, an external evaluative end to which one becomes subordinate. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche likens the adherence to presupposed systems of external values to a form of slavishness, like being a piece of bark adrift in a river, dragged along by its current with no say over the direction in which it moves. This is precisely what, by contrast, most fully defines the Übermensch, and what makes him such an idealized end for the human being to progress to. To Nietzsche, the Übermensch is, first and foremost, an artist, a creative spirit who defines value and meaning for himself as an extension of his own will, rather than enslaving himself to the pretense of objective evaluative ends existing external to his will, and therefore to which he becomes subordinate, or like a slave. This is well represented in the chapter titled On the Three Metamorphoses, from Thus Spoke Zarathustra, wherein Nietzsche conceives of the process of spiritual development that man undergoes when progressing to the Übermensch as consisting of three stages. First, the spirit becomes the camel, which endures the loneliness and suffering of wandering in the desert. Then, the camel becomes the lion, which has the strength to reject the dragon, who represents the presupposed objective value systems of two-world theories, like Christianity. And finally, upon completing its metamorphosis into the Übermensch, the spirit becomes the child, with the will to create new values and meaning for itself, much like a child brims with imagination and creativity in constructing games and make-believe. The child, as the last stage of the spirit's metamorphosis into the Übermensch, represents the Übermensch's nature as it is most fully and completely realized in the child. The noble artist, whose greatness is, somewhat paradoxically, grounded in the almost childlike nature to imagine and create something new for oneself after overcoming the pretense of the dated, objective value systems and two-world theories which came before oneself. This forms the crux of one of Nietzsche's most well-known terms and the defining feature of the Übermensch, the will to power, which in its essence is really and most fully the will to create. This is what defines the Übermensch more than anything else, the capacity to construct new value and meaning for oneself in an act of truly creative artistry rather than subordinate oneself to the illusory pretense of objective value systems pre-existing one's own creative spirit. This is precisely why Nietzsche places such a high value on the role of the artist as he or she who most authentically engages in the self-determination of creative value. In The Aesthetic Justification of Existence, Nietzsche on the Beauty of Exemplar Lives, Jeffrey Church states that the overman, quote, leads to an ideal life whose value is unconditioned, determined by the agent himself for the agent's own purposes. Nietzsche emphasizes the artist, philosopher, and saint precisely because these occupations, unlike others, take as their very purpose the question of the meaning of existence. These occupations do not serve an end outside of themselves, but are self-determining. Thus, Nietzsche's philosophy places such a high premium on the role of aesthetics and the artist precisely because when the presupposed objective values of two-world theories are rejected and overcome, and the naked unintelligibility and meaningless of the world fully confronted, it is only the Übermensch, as a noble artist first and foremost, who possesses the creativity and strength of will to construct new values and meaning as an extension of oneself, to determine the evaluative systems to define human existence going forward. This Nietzschean emphasis on the role of art and aesthetics in creating value for the human experience is one of the aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy that I find most fascinating, and, unfortunately, one of the aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy that tend to be the most commonly misunderstood. While Nietzsche remains one of the most well-known names in contemporary philosophy, most people only know him out of context in associations with phrases commonly repeated by atheists, such as his proclamation from the madman that God is dead, or through some vague association between Nietzsche and a crude caricature of existentialism as nothing more than a nihilistic worldview of meaninglessness and absurdity. Yet, Nietzsche's philosophy, when more properly understood, is not only one which rejects the total meaninglessness of a nihilistic worldview, but, quite to the contrary, instead adamantly advocates for the creative construction of meaning and value as an extension of the strength of one's will. It is my hope that this video has helped elucidate some of the more fascinating and contemporarily relevant aspects of Nietzsche's philosophy in a manner that helps assuage many of the popular misconceptions about the impactful and significant work of Friedrich Nietzsche. If you like my philosophical content and would like to see more of it, help get my channel off the ground by remembering to like, share, comment, and subscribe.